All right, welcome everyone to the final panel of this year's edition of NEXT International Night Culture Conference Mannheim. My name is Matthias Rauch. I'm head of cultural innovation and creative economy here at NEXT Mannheim. I'll be your host today together with my colleague and Night Mayor of Mannheim, Robert Gahr. And we have two fabulous guests with us, Giacomo Botta and Constanze Meyer. Very pleased that you can join us. Hi. And unfortunately, as it looks like Sasha Lord is not going to be able to make it. He had an emergency appointment in Manchester, and he's probably not going to make it and be with us, unfortunately. I wanted to directly ask Giacomo and Constanze to briefly introduce themselves. We're going to have a short keynote of about 15 to 20 minutes by Giacomo on our today's topic, nightlife and sustainability. And then we're going to directly enter a discussion on the topic. You as viewers are more than invited to ask questions directly in the Q&A box or directly in the chat, doesn't matter. And we'll try to integrate all the questions that you might have. So please don't hesitate and go ahead and discuss with us and ask and contribute your perspectives and questions. Constanze, would you go ahead and briefly introduce yourself, what you do?
Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Constanze and I work for the project Clubtopia, which is a joint project of BUND Berlin, so Friends of the Earth Berlin, Club Liebe and Club Commission, and we have a funding from the Berlin Senate of Environment and Transport and Climate Protection. And so our project Clubtopia tries to create and realize Clubtopia, so the club, the sustainable club of the future. And that's what we do with our project. So supporting the Berlin club scene with our knowledge to become greener.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us, Constanze. Very much looking forward to learning about Clubtopia and what you're engaged in. Giacomo, what do you do?
Okay, hello everybody. I'm a researcher and adjunct professor. In Finnish, it's called docenti in urban studies at the University of Helsinki. And well, I've been researching a lot about music and cities, so urbanization and popular music scenes in general, especially in relation to, well, deindustrialization in the past. And in the last few years, I've been dealing a lot with like night studies and night research.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Giacomo, also for being with us. And we're all very much looking forward to your keynote. The digital floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I have a few slides, and I'm sorry if my tone might be pedagogical, but I am a teacher, so I tend to work like that. But so welcome to this short keynote where I will try to sort of present a few elements which are connected to sustainability in general, first of all, and then to the relation between sustainability and nightlife. And I will try to make also a couple of case studies which might be interesting and might generate maybe a bit of discussion later on with Constanze, with everybody who is present today in this session. So, well, on a very, very general level, of course, sustainability is this concept which is very much processual. It has, of course, sustainability is based in the present, but it looks towards the future on one hand, because it's of course about using the classic definition, using resources, natural resources, human resources in a way that won't compromise the future and the future use of these resources. At the same time, sustainability is also geared towards the past, because it has also a lot to do with with heritage, with preservation, and with sort of a commitment to maintaining a diversity that we inherit from the past. Therefore, sustainability and what is called sustainable development is always to be seen in a kind of process. And it's a process which is, of course, definitely temporal in many ways, but it's also a process which is also very much spatial, as I will try to point out later on when we will dig into sustainability and nightlife. But the classic partition of sustainability is into economic, ecological, social, and cultural sustainability. And of course, these kind of four cores cannot exist by themselves. They work through their commonalities, they work through their intersection, and so on. But if we start with economic sustainability, which for many people represents the core around which we can develop a social, a cultural, and ecological sustainability, I have a bit of a different opinion about this. But economic sustainability is, of course, economic growth. It's about jobs, it's about revenues, and it's about maintaining this kind of possibility to jobs and to resources with a long, and not with a short, but with a long perspective. Ecological sustainability, of course, a lot to do with the environment, has a lot to do with recognizing the fact that current changes at the level of the environment, at the level of climate, are having consequences which are devastating for the earth, and they're mostly connected to human activities. And so how to sort of gear towards a change there. Social sustainability is very much connected to equality, to fighting injustice, and to aiming at, of course, developing some kind of welfare and well-being for everybody. It's about education, it's about safety, and so on. And then there's a cultural sustainability, which I kind of connect very much to the idea of heritage, and to this idea of the fact that sustainability as a future element, also a past element, which connects to certain kind of genealogies and to the maintenance of certain kind of cultural diversities, and sort of cherishing and celebrating cultural diversity. So all these kind of four sphere essay, they must be understood as in mood shaping of each other. So I don't believe in an economic core. I believe that a lot of elements are very much influenced, for example, by culture, and by culture as a way to make sense, and therefore to values and to beliefs and to Weltanschauung and so on. So all these elements sort of come together. And of course, they are very much recognized also by the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. There are 17 goals, they all work at intersections. They don't belong to, they are not purely economic, purely ecological, but if you sort of think about them as they are shown here, they work at the intersections of all these kind of sustainabilities. It's very important to understand that. If we move towards the night, we see that after the pandemic, of course, it looks like the nightlife in general has had, well, a lot of problems. And I very much agree with Ben here. However, I very much agree with Ben here when he writes that where many nightclubs already inhabited a precarious position in gentrified, financialized urban space, the pandemic has served to emphasize a club culture's existing fragility. So what we saw happening through the pandemic is something which cannot be explained only by the pandemic. So there was a fragility in nightlife, which was there already before the pandemic. So if I will make references, I will refer several times to Helsinki in this talk. But for example, in 2019, before the pandemic, in the center of Helsinki, 3 quite important clubs shut their doors because of noise complaints, because of rising rents, and because of general touristification of the city center of Helsinki. The same has happened in Berlin with the so-called Clubsterben narrative, which was there before the pandemic. And of course, London with this loss of 40% of clubs in the last years. So those are numbers which were there before the pandemic, and the pandemic sort of emphasized a fragility which was already there. So if we look in terms of nightlife and sustainability, it looks like it was not that sustainable. If it was so fragile, it means that many choices which were made at the level of the present, whatever present it was, they were not made with a view towards the future, or sometimes they were not even made with the view or with learning from the past. And that makes talking about sustainability and night quite sort of challenging somehow. I try to break it up a bit here in terms of looking at what makes a sustainable night. What is a sustainable night made of? What are the ingredients? And on one hand, it's of course governance in like, you know, city governance in general, specifically night governance has an impact. You know, the wave of night mayors, night commissions, which are growing in cities all around the world. So it has been written about already. This has definitely an impact that could gear basically nightlife towards something which is more sustainable. So there is like a kind of political dimension, and it is a political dimension which, of course, I think should be built upon participation, but we can debate about this later on. There is urban planning, which is definitely an element there. Nightlife and planning, they've been work together in this kind of paradoxical way, because a lot of times clubbing created like a buzz towards certain districts, which then became renewed or gentrified, and the nightlife was silenced because of that. So there is this very weird relation. But still, urban planning with developing, you know, smart solution in transportation and lighting, they can have an impact on what is a sustainable night. And then, of course, there is us when we decide to go out. When you go out yourself, the way you go out, where you go when you go out, has an impact on has an impact on the night. So if you decide to go to like, you know, your average club with you know, music from the charts, or if you decide to go to a club where they are, for example, curating a certain kind of music, or they are sort of, for example, choosing to book equally between genders, or they are implementing solutions related to safety, to access, to equality, and so on. So where you decide to go has an impact. So if you go for the sustainable solution, or you go for your average wild night out, so that has an impact. And then, of course, there's the whole dimension of what many people call the scene, the night scene, this highly networked system of organizers, DJs, club owners, and general people who tend to have an impact on the night. just by the way they look and so on. All this kind of highly networked scene, of course, also plays a role in turning or gearing the night towards sustainability. So I think that these four ingredients might be a way to understand to understand how can we have a sustainable night, or what makes a sustainable night. And I have a couple of examples, a couple of case studies here where I think the night has been sustainable or is sustainable right now. So for example, for me, it's I mean, going back to my studies about deindustrialization, it is very interesting to see how residual spaces which were left by the industrialization, so former industrial spaces which were empty, which were unused, which were like wasted, so to say, became very important for the development of dance music cultures, like, you know, for the birth of techno and house in the early 80s in Chicago and Detroit. And they were the spaces where it was basically possible to establish something which was safe for sexual and for ethnic minorities. And it's quite fascinating because we have a variety of level of sustainability here. Partly it is a kind of ecological sustainability in using the space which was residual, which was left to oblivion, and making it alive again, giving it a purpose in architectonical ways. At the same time, we have here some kind of social sustainability in providing a safe space for celebrating, for empowerment, for resistance, whatever you prefer to connect in terms of values to dancing. So there is something here which I find very, very important. And if nowadays we are going to a restaurant, or maybe we are looking for an apartment in a former warehouse, this is partly connected to what happened there and then during exactly that period of crisis. I'm interested in periods of crisis and sustainability, and how when you have less means, you're able to develop something which is more sustainable and more interesting. And in Finland, in the summer of 2020, and partly also in this summer 2021, you had a spread of outdoor underground parties. UG is like Finnish kind of slang for underground. And in Helsinki especially, you had a lot of urban forests, shorelines, areas under construction, which were taken over at night by this kind of free festival, free spaces, which were not to be understood as this kind of plague raves or as technivals, because they were not lasting several days. They were not rural, they were kind of urban events which were lasting at the maximum for the whole night. They spread through social media, through word of mouth. People were just going around in certain shorelines trying to listen for bass drum to find the party, and they were negotiated with the police. And there was a lot of attention, at least in the beginning or in the head of the organizers, towards health guidelines, safety, respect, no profit, resilience in these kind of hard times, and also learning. This is an aspect that's quite interesting, that like organizers were always thinking also in terms of like that through these parties, we will sort of have a pedagogical function and help people to understand how to party safely, and how to make things accessible and more equal. So in many ways, sustainable for me connects to this idea of reacting to a particular crisis, this crisis being an economic crisis, or being it like a health-related pandemic, so health-related crisis. There are some genealogies. There is a connection between what happened here and what is happening in the last couple of summers. And there's also very much a connection with this idea of fighting against mainstream club culture and providing spaces for people who like music and who are involved with the idea of subcultural capital. And also with this idea of democratizing culture. On the other hand, there's also this issue with the politicization of the night, which I think is very much central here, that like sustainability has also a political dimension, and we cannot disregard this, the fact that there are people who are fighting for giving certain kind of rights and providing means for subaltern minorities to express themselves and so on. So what is coming next? I don't know. So I don't have any answer. The back to normal won't happen, or will happen it won't be normal as we thought. But it's very interesting, this attempt, which is ongoing, to disengage the night from profit making only and from a growth which is only sometimes born to the present and not geared toward the future, and basically trying also disengaging from the logics of the nighttime economy. So for me, what we are seeing is like that the night governance will become more relevant, I hope, in a variety of cities. There will be more collaborations, and I think there also the issue of placemaking will play a role in what is going on right now. But these were just my ideas that I wanted to throw on the floor and see what happens. So now we can continue from here, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giacomo, for this very inspiring and impressive keynote, and also the insights from Helsinki I found very interesting. And I was wondering, when you spoke, I think the question that arose in me was, do you feel like the subcultures in Helsinki were strengthened in a way through the pandemic, through the crisis, because the networks became more tightly knit and there was a lot more communication and exchange because of the pandemic?
Well, it is a bit hard to say, because of course, well, Helsinki is a very small city. So also, like, you know, providing a strict division between what is happening in the mainstream and what is happening in the underground is a bit difficult, also because there's very little conflict. It's a city which is not built upon conflict, like, for example, Berlin, I think. But like, therefore, there has been definitely more cohesion at the level of the underground. And there has been, I mean, in my interviews, I found out that, for example, some DJs were normally working in clubs, and now they were, well, they were unemployed. They started organizing these parties. But what they told me was that, like, the pressure that they felt when they were working in real clubbing was so high in terms of, you know, competition, in terms of, you know, providing for the audience, that when everything what has happened made them more able just to become more laid back, and that had an impact also on the music they started playing in these outdoor clubs and so on. And therefore, I mean, you can see also these also some kind of sustainability, the fact that they could start playing the music they like, not the music that is expected to be played because they are in a high, you know, hype club and so on. So yes, something has had an impact, and this impact could have been positive. So that's all I can say, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Constanza, I have a question for you. So, Giacomo mentioned it in his presentation that choosing where to go out has an impact and that clubs can act as pioneers of social change. So, I'm wondering what needs to happen that clubs will be the social laboratory of the future again. So, because I see that a lot of clubs are just consumption temples. So, in Mannheim, we have a few clubs which has this social change inside, but I think a lot of, we need some more. So what do you think?
To be honest, I'm not sure whether I got your question right. Sorry.
Okay. So I repeat it. So what needs to happen that clubs will be the social laboratories of a future again? So regarding to the sustainability.
I guess what Robert is aiming at with this question is like, and what Giacomo also alluded to in his presentation is, clubs used to be a room for experimentation, to try out different identities, to try out minority positions, to just be perhaps also simply different, and to experiment with what I could be perhaps. And we were just wondering that at least in the clubs here, that hardly ever seems to be the case anymore. Like, I just want to be a little bit provocative here too. Our clubs, the social laboratories of the future, as they used to be, I think at least in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I can still see this function in clubs. But we were wondering, do clubs still have this function of being the social labs for trying oneself out and just to really figure out new possibilities for yourself?
Actually, I would say it depends. I'd say there's a diverse range of what clubs, well, as what they see themselves also. Some of them do still have this this laboratory character and trying new things out, and maybe also creating new musical or innovative or social movements. What I feel is that a lot of this innovation and especially with coming from younger audiences and younger organizers is more and more happening in the outdoor events. Because of what Giacomo also mentioned is that the situation for clubs is difficult, and in order to survive as a club, you actually have to look on your numbers. You have to look on what brings in money in order to pay your rent, and otherwise you'll be kicked out. That's why we see there's a lot more freedom in what we here call the free open air scene. And I think there's more room for experimentation there. However, I still feel that there are a lot of clubs that still see their role as being a social laboratory. And what in our experience is that, well, as Clubtopia, we focus more on the ecological sustainability, and what we feel is that for big innovations to happen in ecological terms, the clubs often don't have the perspective. So as Giacomo mentioned, the decisions are made for the present and not for a longer future, but innovation takes a little while to be implemented, and you need to have a long breath to actually do it. That's why the laboratory character, it is still there, and we still see a few clubs that can take this role actually, but they're under a lot of pressure from all the sides, so it's getting more and more difficult to actually have them, for them to have the space to experiment.
You also mentioned that you focus on the ecological sustainability aspects of clubs. Could you elaborate a little bit of what you do with Clubtopia, specifically what some of your projects are, how you're specifically trying to support clubs and club culture?
Sure. So on the one hand, and that's also with what we started, we offer free of charge energy consulting, which has nothing to do with feng shui or the energy flow in your room. It's really how to save energy in the club, how to improve heating, lighting, whatever consumes energy in the club. And with that, we focus really on small steps that the club can make. Because for us, of course, there's been energy consultants who are often not familiar with the special situation of clubs. They don't know how a club is run. They don't know what the issues are. And that's why our focus really is on short-term measures that can also be moved. For example, fridges or the lighting system that can be just moved to the next venue in case of if the club needs to move on. So, and that energy consulting, it's really low, it's easy to access, and the clubs can then implement what we suggest them to do, but of course within the means they have. And in addition to that, we also have a innovation lab called Future Party Lab, which is there to push forward innovation, but also in order for people to exchange. And we try always to bring together people from the sustainability branch and people from the clubbing scene, in order to them for really to exchange ideas and to work together on those ideas, because we feel there's such great creative potential in the clubbing scene, and of course the knowledge from the sustainability is definitely needed, and that's why we try to bring people together with this. And in addition to that, we have a online guide which is a collection of all the measures that the clubs can do. It's called Green Club Guide, and so really a guidebook for everyday life in the club. And what we've just released, and we didn't really release it alone, is our code of conduct, Zukunft feiern, which is a code of conduct made by the clubs themselves, and we have 4 clubs who are the first movers and signed it, and it's really a collection of specific aims they want to achieve in order to become sustainable. And so we didn't want to tell them what to do. We try to get them those to set those goals together and to make them realistic. So from now on, clubs can sign, of course, the code of conduct and then implement the measures. But what's really important is that we didn't want to make any label or certification, because it's really that's high level access. We really wanted to be as accessible as possible and as easy as possible. And therefore we have, we let them set their own goals, and the code of conduct doesn't tell we've already achieved everything. It only tells people we start to go all the way, and we want really to look at all the details and implement those sustainability measures. So that's what we are currently working on.
Awesome, very impressive. Thank you. Giacomo, Constanze just mentioned that you can actually save money by being ecologically aware how you run your club, and you can probably save electricity costs, etc. But I want to be provocative again. I think in order to be sustainable, at least in the transition phase, I believe it will actually cost money. And this increase of the costs, I think, will have to be generated somehow. And usually what happens in a market economy is that the end consumer has to pay for the sustainability costs or for the transition costs. How would you say this transition towards sustainability can be financed, or is there a way to be that it can be compensated, that the club goers or the people enjoying club culture don't have necessarily to pay a lot more money than they used to? for investments, for instance, that would definitely contribute towards sustainability, but would ultimately cost a little bit?
This is, of course, something interesting and something which, of course, for me connects very much to the idea of welfare. So how much are you able yourself to put in to like achieve something which is more sustainable and therefore more equal and therefore more useful to the vast majority of people who are going out. Therefore, I think this like this input as individual taxation or sustainability, I think it is somehow great, and it is something which maybe should be made in a way where of course everybody contributes with the means they have. So I think there is something there which might be, of course, how do you tweaked in many ways. So of course, like you want a night which is equal, but at the same time, of course, there's this paradox. To achieve it, you need to invest somehow from the economic point of view in something, but is investing as something which can also be made in fair and ethical ways, I think.
Constanze, I saw you weren't all that convinced when I started with the cost of sustainability. Was I right? Or do you have a different view on this?
I think it's one of the points that clubs often fear when we talk about sustainability, that the first step would be to, I don't know, pay for a huge installation or make really big investment, which is true. Those are really expensive and those are really effective in terms of carbon neutrality. But those are not the only measures that the clubs can make. And of course, for some of the measures, there are transition costs, that's true. But for the first steps, usually there's no money needed. Just a change of behavior can already make clubs save money, and then have the money later on maybe for investments. To give you an example, switching lights off. I mean, it's stupid and really simple, but we've been, for the energy consulting, we've been to clubs very often in the daylight, and all the lights were on just for one person to have the room clean. That's and with those behavior changes, you can already save money and then, of course, save energy. And I think what people tend to forget is that there are hidden costs in not being or not becoming more sustainable. Those hidden costs being a high energy bill, being higher bill for the waste disposal, what we, I don't know, what's it called, the Restmüll. So when you've put all it together, that's the most expensive waste you can have, instead of separating the waste, which is less expensive. And talking about the longer term effects, or the effects that we already see for climate change, rising temperatures, all of that does already cost money to the clubs, and it will do so in the future. I mean, how many events we've seen who've been just drowning, or that's costing them money. So I think even on a long-term or longer-term scale, there are hidden costs for not actually taking action.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Constanze. I just saw that Sasha just was able to join us. I don't know if he's still here, but I would like to integrate him and bring him into the discussion. Hi, Sasha. Good to see you. Sasha is the nighttime economy advisor for the Greater Manchester region, and I'm very happy that you could join. How much of your time do you have for us? Do you have to leave again, or?
I'm afraid I have to jump out at 10 to 2, about 1:45.
Okay, but that gives us about what, half an hour or so. Yeah, that's great. Awesome. We're just talking about sustainability aspects, Sasha, and I was wondering, were there any sustainability measures that you have put into place at the Warehouse Project or Park Life? Is that something that you're currently dealing with? And if yes, what were some of the measures that you have put in place?
No, firstly, thank you for inviting me. I'm actually based in London today, not
okay.
Just I was on the train first thing. But I think, apologies, was the previous speaker, was it Constanza? Who just made a point then. You can see over my shoulder here, I don't know if you can see it, there's a picture of Park Life, which is one of my festivals, and the capacity is 80,000 people. It's the largest independent metropolitan festival in the UK. And up until probably 3 years ago, the most excitement around the festival was always generated when we announced the lineup, who's headlining it, which artists have we booked. And now it's not, and it's the point that you just made about turning off the lights. We made a comment 3 years ago about, do you know what, we're not going to have any plastic straws on site. We're going to stop plastic straws. And the reaction that we got from our customers, our fans, we've never seen anything like it before. So we started to dig deeper into this now. And actually, the kids that are coming through now get more excited about no plastic on site than having Stormzy on stage. That is what they want. They want us to go more towards a greener festival. And yeah, we've tried to employ this across the board now. So not just at Park Life, at the Warehouse Project as well. And yeah, we have to do this. We're babysitting the next generation, and we have to put our mark in the sand, plant the flag, because if we don't do it, then we're heading for a disaster, aren't we? So I think again, sorry to pick up on the previous point, there is a cost implication, but I think it's well worth that extra cost implication if you can afford it, and it doesn't have to be massive cost about clean generators and things like that to begin with, but certainly those small baby steps. Yes, it might cost more to not sell plastic water bottles and to do something else, or to decant or something, but we need to do that. It's vital, because the carbon footprint that we used to leave up until a few years ago is totally unacceptable.
Sasha, I was wondering, we discussed this previously with Giacomo, and he told me a little bit about the situation in Helsinki, but I was wondering how you perceive the dynamic in Manchester. Do you find that the networks in night culture and nighttime economy have become stronger or more tightly knit because of the pandemic, because people simply had to cooperate and had to communicate and had to come together? Is that something that you found had a real direct effect? And what do you think the outcome for the future of these more tightly knit networks perhaps might be?
Absolutely. And I've got to laugh when you said the word Helsinki. I'm watching the box set Money Heist at the moment. So all these names like Helsinki and Berlin, it's like all the characters coming alive. But yeah, I think with our industry, most certainly in Manchester, in the UK and across Europe, the spotlight was put on us. I think everybody knows that the government in the UK did a particularly poor job in representing the industry and looking after it. In the UK, we are the 5th biggest industry in the whole of the UK, the 5th biggest sector. In Greater Manchester alone, we employ north of 436,000 people. So that's how important it was. And I think because when we go out to a club or a theatre or a restaurant or a bar, that's when we have our fun time. We let our hair down, don't we, with our friends? So the politicians that make the decisions weren't giving us the respect that we were due. And I think because the spotlight was put on our industry, shut down completely, we weren't allowed to operate. Then the public started to get behind us, and the politicians were pushed into helping us. And I think now, in the UK, we've seen the decimation of the high streets that was happening anyway, but COVID most certainly expedited that. And we've lost some really big stores who've left vacuum of spaces on the high streets. You know, they've all moved online. It was always going to happen. And I don't blame them for doing that. It's, you know, for the business decision. But now as an industry, you know, those large spaces can be filled by theatres, by nightclubs, by, you know, large bars. You know, we can now bring energy and life back into those high streets. And I don't know if I'm speaking, I don't know if this is paralleled across Europe or not, but it's certainly something that's happening in the UK. You know, I'm in London today, and when I got off the train and walked to get the taxi, it's quite sad to see so many places now just boarded up. And we can revigorate those places. And I think now more than ever, we play a more important part than pre-COVID, because I think people realise that we are the ones that's going to put the bloodline back into our high streets.
I was wondering, it's a question for everybody, basically, because Giacomo mentioned it in his keynote briefly as well, that a lot of people gravitated towards public space necessarily. And do you think this is something that's going to stick around? Are we going to be meeting in public space a lot more? And what is the role and function of public space when it comes to night culture and nighttime economy? Is that going to change in a way, or has it already changed perhaps? And where do you see the future in this regard?
Is that for me again?
If you want to start, Sasha, yeah. Sure.
I think, well, you know, we've now, I mentioned it this morning on email, actually, you know, that there's a cloud potentially looming over the UK again. They're talking about possibility of more restrictions. The announcement was made last night. That I feel like it's coming again. And one of the things that we all know is it's safer to be outside than inside. Some areas inside are poorly ventilated. So look, we all did such amazing jobs during lockdown, didn't we, of creating safe spaces outside. You know, we saw so many videos, didn't we, of people dancing in their bubbles, which I wasn't particularly a fan of, because I think you can never generate the energy when you're separated and you're in your squares. You know, there's nothing. I think part of a gig is actually being shoulder to shoulder, where it's hot and it's sweaty, and that's how you create the energy. But you know, in our industry, we're survivors, aren't we? We're creatives, and we did that. And I think what's really important to recognize is the fact that we did that. I'm not talking about me personally, I'm talking about the industry. A lot of us did that actually making a loss, but we put on those parties and those events in public spaces because I think we all realized, didn't we, that the public was suffering for lack of entertainment, and that was affecting people's mental health and, you know, and their well-being. So, you know, we played a really, really important part in entertaining whilst COVID was here, and it's not gone away. You know, we are going to be on a roller coaster. I'm confident of that for the next few months, sadly. But yeah, I think we all should pat ourselves on the back for what we did. You know, I think we went above and beyond.
Thanks, Sasha. Constanze, Giacomo, what is your view on this? Because I find a lot of people in club culture, at least in Germany, are also quite critical of moving into public space, because they're saying, you know, we're taking away audience from our clubs if there's all these free outdoor parties, etc., and people just gather in public spaces. What's your view on this? Whoever wants to go first, Giacomo. Yeah.
I don't know if Constanze. So I think that there's, like, of course, there are several issues. Definitely, we are in a moment of transition, and how this transition will go. As I said in the end of my slides, I don't know. I don't know what is going to be the new normal, if it will be normal or not. But definitely, of course, outdoor has been a very important ingredient because, of course, of the fact that there were restrictions to partying inside, first of all. And right now, I think one thing to add is the willingness of people to be in places with a lot of people. You know, this is something which will also be gradual. I don't know if it's just that I'm getting old, but I still don't feel like going to a club right now. But being outside is fine. But and then, of course, I'm talking from a city, from Helsinki, where we have had in the last 10 years some kind of renaissance of public places in the city. So it looks like it started with the so-called restaurant day, where everybody could just open a restaurant on the street. It went on with public saunas, which were built illegally, and people could use it as a sauna. And this kind of outdoor partying is as a genealogy there, and has a lot of continuities in terms of people who are organizing them, in terms of aims they have, and so on. So in many ways, it is something which is gonna stay, and it is something which the city is also interested in maintaining. We also don't have to, we cannot forget that Helsinki, the city of Helsinki, owns 70% of the land of Helsinki. So that they have probably also a lot of possibilities which are not there in other cities, where the land is private or industrial or zoned in particular way. So Helsinki can allow a lot. But then there's also another element here, which is the risk that these will bring to some kind of commodification in the end, where, of course, real estate owners and the so-called gentrifiers and so on will sort of be able to exploit this, and therefore slowly privatizing what is now public. So there are a lot of elements, I think, involved in this process. Maybe next month everybody will be into clubbing again, and but I am very unsure. I cannot say.
All right, Constanze, you're actively supporting open air spaces for clubs, if I understood you correctly. Is that true? And how so are you trying to support this? And do you understand clubs who say, we're really not all that fond of going into public space. We want our club filled with people and not necessarily public spaces?
So regarding your first question, we mostly support clubs, so really venues, but also with workshops we give, and with the events we organize, we also support the outdoor outdoor party scene. And but it's also a lot of this work is done by Berlin's Club Commission, who has a great network in this area. I do definitely understand club owners that feel like they want to have people in their clubs again, but honestly, right now I think it's difficult to give any predictions as to even for the next year. What I think is that in the outdoor events, they existed before the pandemic, and I'm quite sure that it will continue to exist. What we've seen during the closed club period is that those events in public spaces were tolerated, and without necessarily looking at the like a long-term perspective. So maybe things were tolerated that are not to be wished for the future. So meaning that of course those outdoor events are great for especially young people to get their first experience in organizing such events, and it's really highly accessible for everyone. However, especially in cities where green areas, parks are already under a lot of pressure. That's my tree hugger side. Those parks and those green areas, they are already under a lot of pressure, and I think for the future we would have to think about how we can make those outdoor events, keep them accessible, but still think about the impact and reduce the impact on the environment in those parks as much as possible. So sort of making those organizers a little bit more professional in that field. but we honestly feel that there's a huge willingness to do so. I think, or at least I hope that in the future there will be both, so indoor and outdoor events. Yeah, of course, sounds boring, but some kind of rules for those outdoor events would have to be implemented or maybe, yeah, thought of. Also thinking about all the people that maybe don't want to take part in these events and don't, just want to use green areas and parks just for silence and for not being around people. So I think that all of these sides kind of have to be looked at.
Thank you very much. So, Sasha, I have to come back to you again because you have to leave early. But you have a really interesting project in Manchester. It's the Nighttime Economy Blueprint. So I think every city should have something like this. So can you tell us something about it and what are the main aspects?
Yeah, so as well as the warehouse projects on Parklife, I'm the Nighttime Economy Advisor for Greater Manchester. And essentially, I just give direct advice to the Mayor for Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, on the economy. And I'm extremely lucky that he takes the majority of things I say on board. And what we do is we created, when I first took the role on in 2018, I created a blueprint which set out my vision for the following 12 months. And it's things that everybody here will have a concern about, safer transport, better work conditions for the employees, safer environments on the streets, things like that. And at the end of November, actually, the next blueprint comes out, which sets out the vision for the next 3 years. But I do think, I highly recommend every single city region has somebody that is a voice for the nighttime economy, because quite often nightclubs get lost. And it's easy, in the UK, they always use the rhetoric when they have to close the sector down, the hospitality sector, which does include pubs, bars, restaurants. They always run with the word nightclub because it's easy, isn't it? People just think, well, it's only a nightclub. It doesn't really matter. It's a nightclub. So, the mayor has kind of given me a platform to be extremely vocal about it for our industry. I think it's extremely important. Just on the previous point, I think I agree, by the way, a fusion of indoor spaces and outdoor spaces should be the future, giving everybody the choice. But I also have a strong argument that we need to keep the nightclubs open no matter what. We've proven that the nightclubs can be done safely. So every Friday and Saturday, the warehouse project, we have 10,000 people that come through the doors. Every single person on the door has to show, they call it a passport. I don't like the word passport. Now, everybody, in my opinion, has the right to choice and the right to freedom. I have been jabbed, but I have friends who, for whatever reason, have chosen that they don't want to be jabbed. But what we all do a very good job of on the whole is creating safe environments. So on the way, when you come into warehouse projects, you have to show you've either A, been jabbed on the National Health Service app, or you've taken a negative test within the space of the last 48 hours. So we know we're creating a safe environment. We have not seen a spike. So far, we've had, I think, 100,000 people through the doors at Warehouse Project this season, 80,000 a day at Parklife. So we have seen no spike whatsoever by using that system. My concern is if they use the rhetoric of closing nightclubs down again, we're going to see an escalation of house parties that are unregulated. There's no security, there's no searches, there's no paramedics. They're certainly not showing anything to get in, and it's dangerous, and we need to keep them open at all costs, in my opinion.
Yeah, very good point. I think that's the case all over the place, that if clubs are going to be closed again, people are going to find different avenues and going to find other places to gather and that are not controlled. Absolutely. I wanted to come back to the sustainability issue a little bit more. Again, do you think there need to be sort of policy recommendations or policy frameworks that support sustainability efforts in nighttime economy and night culture? And what should they look like? What are we currently lacking in order to get real incentives on the way?
So I work with a company called Live Nation, and I welcome anybody to go onto the Live Nation website and have a look at something called the Green Pledge. And the Green Pledge is what they're working towards. It's an American-based company, but they're based all over Europe as well. I'm presuming most of you will have come across them. And what they're saying is, look, we have not got everything right at the moment, but this is our 5-year pledge. We want to work towards this. So they've set the targets where they want to be in 5 years, and they just want to make it as green and sustainable as possible. You know, I'm fortunate with park life that we're not camping, so our carbon footprint's not as bad as other festivals. But even then, we think, well, you know, we don't want thousands of taxis coming here to the festival. So we actually pay for double-decker buses. We pay for private trams so that we can get. Out of the 80,000 people, we put 43,000 people onto that transport to get them in, to reduce our carbon footprint. And every single year we try and build on that.
Giacomo, Constanze, do you think we need new policies in order to encourage the move towards sustainability? Or are the stakeholders just going to do it because they feel like it's the right thing to do? But then I have a second question. Perhaps that might be an easier one. Do you think the awareness of the SDGs, of the Sustainable Development Goals, are at a level where you would say, you know, most people who go out at night are aware of these goals and know what to do with them and are sort of conscious about them, or do we need to do a better job of communicating these SDGs in night culture and nighttime economy? And how would we best do that?
May I? You actually see me smiling when talking about those SDGs. I think I just saw myself running around the club asking people if they could list one of those. Probably they wouldn't be able to. However, actually, I think, or I know, because I did a research in 2018 amongst clubbers in Berlin, whether they are interested in sustainability and whether they want nightclubs to become greener. And actually a really, really high percentage said yes. So they share those values, which are part of the SDG. So even if they don't know every SDG for detail. I'd say there is an awareness. And I also think that to many people, the solutions are clear and they actually know what they need to do. They just need to start doing it and actually implementing those sustainability measures. And talking about your question regarding policies, if the policies were already, so if they were correct now, I think that the businesses would already start. So yes, of course, there needs to be a change in policies, but also in funding. So of course, those transition costs that you've been mentioning earlier, they are there, and clubs need a little support to make that transition. And also they need the long-term perspective. So nightlife being protected, actually, and club spaces being protected. So to have a really a vision, a perspective for the next, let's say, 10, 15 years. So yes, we do need a change in policies and more support for the clubs, and yeah.
Then I have a question to Sasha when we talk about supporting the night operators. So how can a city administration support its local nighttime operators to make the businesses more sustainable?
That's a very good question. And I think, I'm always, just going back to the previous speaker, Costanza, I'm always extremely jealous of Berlin because, in the late 80s, when Manchester was all about New Order and the Happy Mondays, the Stone Roses and everything like that, everyone was looking at Manchester and what we were doing. But now I've been to Berlin quite a few times, and you've got it right. You've absolutely got it right. I think you cater for everybody, and I think people from Berlin, I think babies in nappies listen to techno, and I'm pretty confident at the funerals you go to, you're coughing and listening to techno. It's just everybody gets it. You've somehow nailed it. I don't know how you've done it, but I think going back to the question now, the local authorities and the councils, they are engaging. I think they're getting pressure from the public about what are you going to do to make it sustainable. And I'm not talking about just clubs or nightlife here. I'm talking about in general. We've set targets to be carbon neutral in Manchester, I think by 2038. We have to do this. We really have to push for it. And I think all of us have got a strong enough platform to support that. And I think if our peers are watching what we're doing and we're making a statement, other people will follow. We've got the opportunity to do that. So public perception is turning, and yes, you are going to get the idiots like Donald Trump, who thinks that everything's great in the world and there isn't a problem. Well, there is a problem. We see it every time we turn the news on, don't we? We know it's not right. You don't have to be scientists. So I think pressure from the politicians is absolutely key, but I do think they're starting to talk and work with us.
Constanza has hinted at it a little bit, saying we need new funds to support a development towards sustainability. But I was wondering, what are the specific wishes that you would have, or what are you hoping for? Is it money primarily, or is it perhaps, could it also be training? Could it be knowledge? Could it be the training of operators, etc.? So I'm trying to get at what would be an ideal mix between funding on monetary support and sort of like soft skills, knowledge transfer, etc.
No, I get it. I think a solution would be, I don't know if it's the same across Europe, but as operators, we need to pay something called business rates, annual business rates that the council take. I think maybe there's an incentive where the council set a bar to say, look, if you achieve this, we will reduce the business rates. Or if you achieve this, we will reduce maybe the tax slightly, something to incentivize us and other operators to set a higher level. And in return, because across the board, we know all the councils have run out of money during COVID. So, the purses and the wallets are empty at the moment. But I think a long-term vision is, okay, well, in 3, 4 years, 5 years, if you've achieved this, you can pay less VAT, or get a slight discount, something along those lines. Almost like a standard, like a kite mark. If you achieve this, you just get it certificated, then that's how you do it. I think that would be a solution. And I think there are business operators out there that really don't care, and all they think about is their bottom line. Well, I think they would care if they realized their bottom line would increase by doing this.
So tax incentives, I think, would be one way to go. Absolutely, I agree. Constanza, would you like to add something, Giacomo?
Yeah, I think you were asking whether knowledge or money is what we hope for. I think it's both. With the funding that we have, we can offer that knowledge. We can try to support the organizers, the venues. Even if I think we could even do more training but we do feel that there's a real demand for it. However, in addition to the knowledge, of course, venues and organizers, they do need funding to implement sustainability measures. And what we've seen in the last years, there is public funding for sustainability measures, but often for very big investments, which also have to be paid back partly, and the barriers are really high to actually get this funding. And what we hope for would be something a little bit like we had a Lärmschutzfonds, so it's funding for noise
insulation.
Insulation, yeah. We had this, and it was sort of organized by the club commission. They were sort of the link from the Senate to the clubs, and helped quite a few clubs to have noise insulation. And I think what we would be hoping for is really to have something similar with sustainability or ecological measures that the clubs can take. It takes both funding and knowledge.
Yeah, Giacomo.
If I can add just something, I think there's also an issue of scales here that we have to take into account. That there's, of course, there is a problem, and there is, of course, the urban regional way to solve it, which take into account, a particular scale and it's more general in its implementation, where you can, of course, create knowledge, solve problems, educate people, provide resources, and so on, which is not only targeted towards the nightlife, but it is more generally connected to living in a city, and that's one scale and one room for action, which has a lot of influence then on what happened at night. And I think that this is one way, but of course, if you only do these, you might have a very easy reaction from the nightlife entrepreneurs and workers and so on, with some greenwashing. We just change the straws to paper and we've done. And this is where I think the other scale came in, where Constanze and Sasha are working, which is of course creating a knowledge which is specific to the nightlife. But I think the only way to go is to have both, to have something which is a strong, sustainable, a strong understanding of sustainability issues at the urban regional level, so in its complexity, and then one which is targeting nightlife. You have to have both, basically, to create a sustainable nightlife. So that's all.
Yeah, I think the major challenge when it comes to sustainability is really to take these very abstract goals that are global goals necessarily and break them down to the local level and what you can actually do on the local level, that people understand that they can have a direct impact with whatever they're doing to contribute towards these, of course, abstract and global goals. But that, I think, is the only way forward ultimately. I really wanted to thank you all for this great discussion. I think Sasha has to leave. Thank you for joining us nonetheless. It was great. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Giacomo. Thank you, Constanze. We're going to record this, or we have recorded this, and we're going to share the recording with you, and feel free to share that as well, of course. This has been the last panel of NEXT International Night Culture Conference Mannheim, and keep in touch. There's going to be a third edition, I hope, probably next year or the year after. We're not going to go away that quickly. And thank you again for all the inputs, the ideas, and the lively discussion.